There was a game that was only released in Japan, yet somehow managed to influence just about every survival horror game from that point forward. I just want to say thank you so much for watching my video. If you haven't been seeing it, I have been posting shorts a lot here on YouTube where I talk about video game facts and cool little trivia. If that's something you'd be interested in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tick off that little bell so you can know whenever I post something new. Alright, let's check out this hidden gem. The Clock Tower was a survival horror game released way back in 1995. This game has had such a major impact on all horror games, yet it was never released outside of Japan, so we never got our own version here in the West. In the Clock Tower, you play as Jennifer, a young girl who was just adopted along with your sisters by a wealthy millionaire named Simon Barrows. He lives in a mansion called the Clock Tower. The woman who brings you to the tower excuses herself so she can go and find Simon. But she takes a suspiciously long time in doing so. After some time passes, Jennifer decides she's going to investigate to see what happened to this woman. As soon as she leaves the room, she hears a scream in the room she came from, so she goes back to investigate. After searching around for a minute or two, she discovers that her sister has been killed by this deformed little boy named Bobby. In this game, they refer to him as Scissor Man. Bobby wields a giant pair of scissors, but he is quite a bit smaller than Jennifer. The issue is that you can't fight as Jennifer. Instead, you must run and hide at every chance in order to avoid danger. You're going to spend the rest of your time with this game trying to solve puzzles in order to escape, all while avoiding Bobby. The goal of the game is to help Jennifer figure out exactly what's going on in this crazy mansion. You have to solve puzzles in order to escape with everybody that you can. But remember, Jennifer can't fight, so you have to run, hide, and use traps in order to stay away from Scissor Man and stay alive. In 1985, Jennifer Connelly starred in a movie called Phenomena. It was directed by Dario Argento. Connelly plays a young girl who is at an all-girls boarding school, where she discovers she has psychic powers where she can speak to insects and small animals. She uses these powers to try to lure out a killer who has been killing the girls at this boarding school. The director of Clock Tower, Hifumi Kono, was a big fan of Dario Argento's movie, so he used this movie as inspiration for his video game. Back in the early 90s, survival horror was a brand new field for video games. Yes, we did have Sweet Home, but there weren't a lot of games to draw inspiration from, so Kono had no choice but to use a movie in order to draw his own inspiration for his brand new video game. And this is why I brought up the movie. It was the inspiration for Clock Tower. Obviously, Jennifer shares the same name as Connelly, but even going beyond that, physically, they share more than a passing resemblance. The story is also very similar as far as it goes, with having a young girl who's trapped in an unknown place trying to escape from a killer, while having themes of the occult running throughout the whole story. Exploring a brand new idea wasn't Kono's only challenge. They had very limited funds and a very small team working to create this brand new masterpiece. Clock Tower could have been doomed to end up in a bargain bin, a game made by a small developer who tried a few new things that didn't really work out. Instead, this game influenced every horror game from that point forward. One trait that Kono had was courage. He was willing to do things that nobody else thought would work in a video game, just to see how the player would react. The biggest thing that he did to this video game, which made it stand out, was using a regular girl as the protagonist, not a hero like most video games were doing at the time. Instead, you had a regular girl stuck in a very irregular situation. A lot of people told Kono that this would be very boring for the players, since they wouldn't be able to do anything and it wouldn't be very fun to have to run all the time. Instead, it had the opposite effect. It made players feel far more invested, since Jennifer was just like them. Instead of being a weapons expert or being some kind of special martial artist, she was just a girl, so all she could do was run and hide. And that, in turn, made the players feel more invested and have to think more clearly to every decision that they made, because if they made the wrong decision, Jennifer would die, and there was nothing they could do about it. Kono decided to implement a stamina bar and a health meter. Now, a lot of games did have some kind of a health measurement device, but it was usually just a way to let the player know when they were about to die. In this game, on the other hand, Kono decided to make it actually affect gameplay. What this meant is when Jennifer's health was low, she was going to run slower and had a higher risk of tripping, which could be detrimental in the middle of a chase. The stamina bar was also something that affected the way that the game played. Players weren't free to just run around willy-nilly. Instead, they had to think strategically, because if you ran into the Scissor Man, you wanted that stamina there so you could run away. The problem is that you can't just stand still and let it refill. Instead, you have to sit Jennifer down, which leaves her liable to attack. And this was an idea that made the game so much more challenging despite it not being fast-paced. Atmosphere was a key component to this video game. Most video games still use music. I mean, think of Zelda, Mario, memorable tunes that stick in your head. But Kono decided to go the polar opposite with this game and not use any music, instead relying on sound effects to build that suspense. You spend most of the time listening to footsteps, listening to background noise, and when the music kicks in, you know you're in trouble. It's used sparingly in order to drive a certain feeling for the player, something that wasn't very common back then. Kono took some very big risks in making Clock Tower. A lot of the things that he was willing to try, nobody else thought would work. But instead of driving players away, it made players fight harder to protect Jennifer, because we didn't feel invincible. Instead, we had to think harder and be a lot wiser in our decisions. Kono created a whole new way of playing video games that still have impact in video games today. Look at Dark Souls, for example. Stamina is where you live and where you die, and if you're not careful with it, you're going to be left vulnerable at the worst moment, just like Jennifer when you're running away from the Scissors Man. And when you're playing something like Visage, where you're just a regular person stuck in a very extreme circumstance, just like Jennifer being a regular girl stuck in this crazy place, being surrounded by crazy people. Or the fact that he was willing to get rid of music for the most part and just rely on atmosphere. I mean, look at Outlast, a video game where the music is very, very minimal and the fear comes from the noises you hear, the creaking doors, the footsteps, the breathing. You don't have to have music in order to build atmosphere, and Kono showed us that. Nowadays, it's common to see developers look back at other successful horror games and use those ideas in their own game, but Kono didn't have that luxury. Instead, he had to dig into his own mind and come up with new ideas, which at times seemed risky. I bet you he had no idea that his game would have such a huge impact in the rest of video gaming. It's too bad that nobody in the West really got to have a real release of this game, but in one way or another, I guess we have played Kono's games, because his ideas are everywhere. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video, and if you did, obviously you must have liked this, so hit that subscribe button, hit the little bell so you guys can know when I post things. Don't forget that I also post on TikTok, and I do a lot of shorts here, so if you're interested in game facts, those places are good places to check me out. Anyways, I'll see you with the next game.